episode of Immersed. My name is Sarah Lem. I am one of your co-hosts who is, I guess, still learning the tricks of the trade with the unmuting buttons. And I am joined by John Alexio, founder of Studio Feed and Subpack. Hello, John.
Hey, great to be here.
Good to have you. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, Immersed is an event series that we've been doing for 2 years now. And it's a show that brings in artists, academics, technologists, practitioners to get into some conversations around how music can optimally affect us, both as individuals and society. And we have a super exciting show for you guys today. We're doing a talk on the sound of change, the future of our music industry. And we're bringing an amazing cast of characters in for you for a bit of a panel chat, which will be followed by audience Q&As. So you can hit us up on your socials at any point. Following our panel chat, we'll have a performance by King Britt. And yeah, I think that's about all I'll say. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. And coming in from San Diego, we have King Britt.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Good, pleasure to have you. I'm not sure how much of an introduction is in order here, but King Britt is an educator, producer, label owner, DJ globally, thousands of festivals and performances over the years. Composer and producer, has collaborated with the likes of De La Soul, Madlib, Sound Orchestra, Saul Williams, and more. You run a monthly radio show Transmission on NTS Radio, which has some amazing live electronic improv and experiments. And most recently, a teaching assistant at the University of California, San Diego, which we're excited to get a bit more into. So welcome, King Britt.
Thank you so much.
We are also joined today by Moor Mother. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Moor Mother is tuning in from Philadelphia. National, international touring musician, poet, curator, visual artist, workshop facilitator. She's performed numerous festivals and been on stage with the likes of King Britt and Bell Hooks, to name a few, and is one half of the collective Black Quantum Futurism with Rashid Phillips. So welcome, Moor Mother. Pleasure to have you. Coming in from LA, we have Andreea Magdalina. Hello, Andreea.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, pleasure to have you. Andrea's work is rooted at the intersection of music and technology, with a focus on empowering women and gender minorities. She's the founder of shesaid.so, a global community of women and gender minorities, and she is here today to lend us that perspective. Welcome again.
Thank you, Sam.
Another member of our all-star panel is Pinch, coming to us from the UK. Hello, Pinch.
Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for having me on.
There you go. Another person who may not need a huge introduction, but Pinch has built his name and reputation in the experimental early years of the UK dubstep scene. He's been contributing to the bass-driven UK music scene for years through his work as a producer, a performer, and through his labels, Tectonic Recordings and Cold Recordings, newer label. Right. So welcome, Pinch.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we have an industry veteran and journalist, Mr. Joe Muggs. Hello, Joe.
Hi. You're making me feel old.
We're all veterans to some capacity, I think. Joe's written for a broad range of titles, including The Guardian, Telegraph, The Wire, and has been involved in the music scene since the early 90s in a ton of different capacities. Writer, DJ, promoter, A&R, you name it. I think Joe's had his hands in it. So, and coming in from the UK to give us that perspective. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
And I think without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful moderator, Mr. John Alexio, and take my leave of you all. Thank you to everyone tuning in. You can check out past shows, future shows, this show, anything you want at projectimmerse.org. Remember to stay with us on your socials. Hit us up with your questions as you go. This is an opportunity for us to really kind of build a community and a conversation together. Have a good show.
Right on. Good to see everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for everyone's time. I know this is a really important topic for all of us. And I think, you know, just really digging into, as members of the music ecosystem, let's say artists, technologists, creators, journalists, what do we want to see? How do we want to see music be at the forefront of society? And I think with the people that we have on this panel, there's some beautiful discussions that we're going to have. I mean, King, maybe kicking it off with you, man, like what types of things would you like to see? What are you seeing? What are some foundational changes that you think need to happen?
Well, I think that the value of music needs to come back. You know, it's been over the past, I would say 10 years, there's been a devaluing of music and the importance of it, not only from just a listening standpoint, but also political standpoint. So I feel that, you know, especially the new generation who kind of came up without buying music, but just streaming music, you know, they don't really understand, you know, how much goes into making an album, you know, how much goes into writing a song, you know, your heart and soul's going into it. And then for it to just be streamed by $1 billion company that only pays pennies as far as residuals, it's not happening. And so the whole business structure on the business side needs to really shift. And so platforms like Bandcamp, which I can't champion more, it's just unbelievable how you can, because I've been, you know, I'm 51 years old, so I've seen many iterations of the music business. And we're at a point now where an artist can create something. I could create something right now and have it up right to my audience direct, like in an hour. And that's unheard of. That's wild. And then they can buy it right from the source. And also Bandcamp has a beautiful app where you can converse right with the people that are buying your stuff. So all your supporters, you know, you're building that direct interaction. But, you know, bringing it back to buying music instead of streaming music from your favorite artist. I'm not putting streaming down at all. It's just the business architecture behind it is not working for an artist at all. And so, you know, bringing it back to valuing the music, but also having young people and, you know, our generation too, understand we need to buy this music to support the whole system, not just that artist, but the whole system altogether.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's not working for the artist, but it's working for the industry and the system, I suppose, which obviously is not sustainable. My Moor mother, what has your experience been on Bandcamp, and what types of things are you seeing out there that are more sustainable for artists? Just curious.
I like Bandcamp. You know, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, I was on Bandcamp I've been on Bandcamp for a while. I can't remember exactly when I signed up, but I know it was early. And it was just cool to be able to like make an EP and have it up there and be able to write my own words about it and make an album cover, you know? And it was seen in like not like a Facebook or what was the other thing?
MySpace.
Yeah, not like a MySpace thing.
Yeah.
There was all these other things to distract you. It was like if people went on your SoundCloud, they were there for the sounds and, you know, that kind of thing. But I never really paid attention to it. You know, I would just put it up and that was more of my satisfaction. And then so when COVID hit hard, then it was like, you know, they introduced Bandcamp Day, you know, and I didn't participate the first time, but you know, I was looking at some artists' responses, and I was like, oh, okay, looks like this Bandcamp thing may be pretty cool as far as participating, you know. And I don't even know what the first thing I released, but I released something, and it went really well, and I was like, what? It was, you know, it blew my mind because I was just busy touring. So I really didn't have to like check into Bandcamp or anything, you know. It's just like my music's out there, somebody's getting it somewhere, you know. Not like now I participate with Bandcamp, you know. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put out a single, or like, you know, thinking about things for my fans, you know, stuff like this, or people who enjoy my music. So yeah, since that first time, I was like, I'm gonna do it every time. But then I have other music scheduled to be released, so it kind of threw me off of it. But it definitely was like sports, you know, just like something to participate in with a bunch of your colleagues, you know. And yeah, it was just fun.
Right on. For those that aren't as familiar with sort of the music platforms out there, what are some of the lessons that, you know, Bandcamp has taught? This is for any of the creators on in the mix here, that other types of platforms, you know, should try to, you know, pull in if and when they're sort of pressured to. Maybe even King, back to you, or anyone that uses Bandcamp and any other of the platforms. Why are they special?
I mean, I as an employee of Bandcamp or partially employee, right. You know, I have to shout out how they're using Bandcamp daily and how they made the choice to find experts rather than use algorithms to draw people to music. They've made money. They've been a profitable business since day one because, you know, they just take a percentage. It's a very simple business model. And they were kind of sitting on money, and they were sitting on vast amounts of music, billions of tracks, and trying to work out how to get people to navigate through it. And as I read it, I mean, you know, I wasn't privy to the kind of executive meetings, but the decision was made that rather than invest in tech and prediction engines and all of that kind of thing, they would invest in humans to guide people through music, to tell stories about the music. And that has been phenomenal. And Bandcamp Daily is beautiful because it's just a scrolling blog. It's just stories about artists. Very little hype. It's written by people who are enthusiasts but knowledgeable. I mean, you know, obviously I would say this, but you know, I read the other writers. I read it as a fan of good writing and a fan of informative writing, and that simplicity has been really important. It's kind of analogous to the directness of the connection between artist and fan. There's also, you know, direct connection with curators, with writers.
Yeah, well said. I mean, Andreea, I think wanted to give you the floor to talk a little bit about what you're up to and how can it lead to a more sustainable and thriving industry and the types of things that you're doing, working with tech companies, and how that's being shaped.
Well, funnily enough, I've been at the forefront of the streaming conversation since 2012 because my first music industry job was as a community manager at Mixcloud. I was one of the first employees, so I was very close to the founding team and to the sort of rationale they put behind the platform. And essentially they were trying to make radio streams legal and get people paid for it. And I remember there was always the conversation of SoundCloud versus Mixcloud sort of thing. And we were the ones paying for royalties, paying for licensing, and people didn't really seem to care up until a bunch of takedowns started happening, when the law finally caught up with the technology, because I feel like that's what we're experiencing now, and what's happening in the US Congress in regards to TikTok, and what's happening in France in regards to, I believe, Google or Apple Music, I can't remember exactly, is demonstrating that finally the legislators are slowly catching up with the technology and trying to introduce new regulations that ultimately impact how much responsibility these platforms have towards compensating each creator in a more sustainable way. So I feel like that's a whole conversation in one. And on that side, I have since not been as involved in streaming, but kind of keeping an eye on things. And I also have to shout out Patreon, because we recently launched a page for the shesaid.so community as a way to continue staying alive and independent and supported by our members who are invested in us continuing the work that we have started. Whereas in the past, we were relying on brand partnerships and event sponsorships, all of which went away. And so I know that a ton of other artists or creators of any kind, including writers, journalists, and so on, collectives like ours, have turned to Patreon or platforms like Patreon as a way to create more sustainability around their livelihood. And it's part of this growing trend, I believe, in the music industry and in the creative industries, more broadly speaking, of artists or creators of any kind becoming entrepreneurs and looking at their craft more so as a startup, as a business, as opposed to just kind of, you know, and King Britt is a perfect example of that as well, going from performer, producer to teacher in academia. All of a sudden, there's this whole new world of where you can, you know, utilize your talents, your skills, and so on, and generate income from. And I think more and more artists and creators are now starting to look at alternative ways of generating income that doesn't rely on touring, which is also unsustainable, as the pandemic has so direly shown.
Yeah, and well said, and certainly unsustainable more and more, particularly, you know, with a lot of the, let's say, headlines in the UK, and how the government there is really, you know, tearing down ultimately the cultural momentum that's impacted so many people, the sounds and you know, sounds artists that ultimately can't really play live anymore. Rob and Joe, I mean, what are you guys seeing in the UK as far as what the government's up to, and what are some ways to maybe turn that around?
It's total abandonment, really. They're not doing anything and leaving people out to dry. I mean, you know, we have, as King Britt rightly pointed out earlier, a move in the last 20, 30 years, especially last 10 years, from people predominantly in music making their money from record sales and publishing income streams through to the gig income. And in, you know, I had a lot of anecdotal stuff, perhaps, that, you know, things were weighted the other way around. You would have to tour to sell your record, and now you sell a record so you could go on tour. So we've kind of created this impossible system that was not ready for COVID-19 response. I mean, I obviously think the UK government is terrible and useless and across the board about a lot of things, and they've neglected lots of areas. So it doesn't surprise me that they neglect an area like music and culture, entertainment, hospitality, all of these kind of things. They're very, they don't have a lot of motivation to engage with, I think, at the moment, from their side, I think, culturally speaking. And yeah, you know, the big question we have as a music industry now is, okay, is it possible to get back to how things were in 20, 30 years? Is that even a desirable outcome ultimately? Is it kind of like entropy? Once we've been spoilt with these options of having free downloadable content, are we ever going to really go back in any kind of volume to buying things? Or, as Andreea pointed out, you know, are we going to be moving towards a kind of Patreon style? Every artist has a subscription model, which I think is in the short term probably the most realistic, sustainable option that artists have in the short term, whilst venues are closed and gigs are not an option. But I think there's also problems with that. For instance, you really kind of need a certain amount of gravity, if you like, a certain following before you can even get much of a Patreon following. So if you're starting out in this context, that's not necessarily that helpful either. And then maybe you have, okay, is there an alternative platform that can offer things in a similar style to Patreon, but, you know, perhaps it encourages followers like a social media basis, so it's perhaps a lot of free content being offered. And then you have the problem of a race to the bottom to give as much as you can, and that can obviously then devalue what's being offered as well. So there's a lot of conundrums around it. Yeah, in terms of the UK helping things out, I mean, they're doing the opposite. I mean, this 10 p.m. curfew, which is completely arbitrary. We have a 10 p.m. curfew in bars and restaurants at the moment, which has led to more kind of street drinking and perhaps more interactions that are uncontrolled. So it's actually counterproductive for the very reason it's supposed to be in place. So, I mean, you know, in that kind of context, there's not a lot of hope in the short term. But yeah, maybe Joe has some other points on that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a catastrophe. I mean, in every possible way, as you've described. It's a scorched earth government. I mean, you know, I think we have Trumpian kleptocrats here who are slashing and burning and allowing their friends to scoop up the mess. I'm sure that abandoned venues, you know, venues that have gone bankrupt are going to be hoovered up by large landlords and corporations, and we're going to see, you know, further corporatization of the live infrastructure as things go on. People with decades of incredible skill, and you know, the UK's music scene is unique and has been marketed as such by previous governments, and yet, you know, these people with thousands, millions of person hours of skill built up are just being hung out to dry, completely abandoned. But it is throwing these conversations into relief about what can happen to the music industry, and something I'll probably come back to again, because, you know, I've been heavily focusing on it this week. It's World Mental Health Day today, and an amazing book just came out called "Does Music Make You Sick?" I'm going to try and do the screen share here.
Try and do it. Let's see how it goes.
See if we can get the cover up. Yeah, I think that's it. So I interviewed the authors of this book this week, and they've been doing this research project for 4-5 years now, which is just listening to the stories of musicians and building up a picture of what it is to be a musician in the modern world, and using mental health as a sort of baseline, but actually talking about how we value musicianship and what the experience is on the other side of the transaction from the consumer, because everything's so consumer focused these days. And they predicted the knife edge. You know, they said the music industry is at a cliff edge. 4 years ago, they were already saying this from the very beginning of their research. And of course, what's happened is that this is like, you know, flick the knife in the air. Everyone's scattered around. It's the catastrophe has come, but it was always there, and we've always had the knowledge that this kind of crisis was probably inevitable at some point. So what's happening now is conversations that had to happen, and all of these things about patronage, about sustainability, about class difference, about protection of mental health, about the intersectionality of prejudice. You know, obviously we've had the building campaigns on racial and gender and sexuality, equality and opportunity and so on within the music industry. We're having to deal with all of this at once. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I guess that's why we're here today. But yeah, it's unbelievably tricky, because we're trying to have all these conversations at once. Yeah,
an opportunity, perhaps, given all the disruption going on. I think, King, coming back to you, you know, we had a good chat amongst all of us about the importance of education, in particular music education. I know for me personally, I had a chance to really dig into jazz music and its genesis and a lot of the merits of the art form. I think it was a Stanley Crouch, who was talking about something like, you know, it shows a society that you can shine as an individual jazz musician in the context of the band, and sort of thinking about, you know, society a little bit more in that way. Yep, shining as an individual within the context of a band. I mean, there's so much music can teach us, and I know you're doing a bunch of really impactful things at UCSD. Maybe talk a little bit about the importance of education.
Well, a few things. First, I just want to send a shout out to Thelonious Monk because it's his birthday today.
Oh, nice.
Second thing, we were talking about the UK and how they've kind of just this, you know, they don't care about the artists, but we should also talk about the other side, Berlin, because Berlin really supported. I mean, to see what they've done with supporting artists in Berlin was just mind blowing, and it really was it raised the bar for all political parties to in different countries to kind of wake up and like, yo, why did they should ask, why did Berlin give so much money to the artists? Because they really value the artists, and their main income in Berlin is entertainment, is electronic music, and they recognize that. And see, a lot of governments don't recognize this, you know. So I felt it was important to talk about Berlin in particular, that just on that note. But getting back to the university environment, I was very fortunate to become a professor here at UCSD, and I felt it was important to bring, you know, my life as an electronic musician into academia and bring my colleagues from that world into this world. And to do that, I felt it was important to also pay tribute to all the persons of color that are instrumental and pioneers in electronic music that don't get talked about in an academia. And when I got here, I was really upset. Like, I wasn't seeing us represented within the context of electronic music, in the educational sense and what they were teaching. And so starting Blacktronica, which is the course that I created, you know, we've had everyone. We had Moor Mother, we had Shabazz Palaces, we had Carl Craig, Juan Atkins. I mean, all the pioneers and the people that are pushing sonics forward, and all persons of color that, you know, explained about the politics behind the sounds that were being made and the sounds that have been appropriated and the struggles that they've come up with in the music industry. So I felt it was important to do that. And it was fantastic to see the young people in my class just completely open, completely listening, and really valuing the information. Because once you know the history of the music and how it was made and what went into it, you value it more. And you know, and young people may, oh, okay, well, it's not just wallpaper. It's actually music and ideas and urgency around politics that really went into the sound of making this music, you know. And even though it's come to, you know, through different generations and through different iterations, the core values of those genres are still there. And so I feel it was very important to have that voice in academia.
Can you riff a little bit off of your comment about wallpaper? I think, you know, over the years, as we take in music, it's becoming, you know, cheaper and cheaper and more in the background. And, you know, surely that impacts the perceived value. I'm curious to get your thoughts and then maybe pass the mic around.
I mean, you know, streaming has really done it. And so my missions recently is like, we have to take the power back from streaming as artists, because there would be no Spotify without us. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're making billions of dollars from us. And so, you know, don't give them the whole album, give them 2 songs. You know, it's cool. I mean, it is a good platform for visibility, but don't give them the whole album. If you want the whole album, come to my Bandcamp and pick it up. You know, but you have to take the power back. But a lot of people just, they stream so much, and because they don't value the music, they just put it on and just do what they got to do. And so we have to shift that as artists. We have the power to shift that. I feel anyway.
How? Let's talk about that. Kamai, just curious to get your thoughts. How can this is a really tough question, obviously, but maybe we can just riff around it. How do artists and creators unite to ultimately, you know, potentially be a unified voice? Because to your point, King, like none of this stuff exists without creators.
You're asking me how
Yeah.
how do musicians unite? Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's ways they can unite, but I don't know how they can unite. You know, I only know so many musicians. Why is that? I don't know. People like who they like, and they generate to what's familiar, or what looks and sounds like their world, or a world they want to be in. You know, I guess everyone can just like try to like, you know, make as many colleagues as you can, you know what I mean? Or many friends in music, you know, try to develop healthy relationships with artists you work with, instead of just being maybe so disposable of like, you do this one thing and that's it, you know what I mean? So maybe like strengthening those relationships.
Well, you're doing that in with your community hub and lab. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that type of sort of anchor in a community that you've been involved in building, that sort of, obviously it's harder now with face-to-face, but how would something like that tie into this idea of community and solidarity?
Well, I think you're talking about Community Futures Lab, and that project was in 2016. We received a grant from A Blade of Grass based in New York. So, you know, but that was just enough, the grant was just enough money for a year to have the actual physical space. So I guess the thing from that is to, you know, for more of these organizations to, you know, continue or, you know, expand how they help, you know, artists that are invested in their community, you know, and for artists to share these kind of things in endowments and museums and all of that. But really try to work to make these grants, fellowships accessible, you know, to many artists.
Yeah, and that's no joke, because the money from the government and the money from the brands is sort of drying up. Certain energy drink, you know, isn't out there as much anymore, you know, doing what they're doing. And I think accessing, you know, those types of resources, it's getting smaller and smaller. But I think, you know, Joe, from your end, just curious, I know you did some work on sound system culture, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about how some things we can learn from that, you know, and sort of transport into where we see a society with music at the forefront. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, it froze for a second there. I didn't know whether it was on or off. Yes, my beautiful book here. You know, during the research process for that, which has been my life hanging around big speakers, basically, I've thought a lot about how cultural values are passed down, how you know, things like electronic music, rave music, Caribbean music, hip hop culture, all of these things are folk cultures. You know, they're not youth fads. Hip hop has been with us for what, 40 years plus now. jazz, hip hop, each of these things is kind of a strand of folk culture. And when you start looking at how the values, both good and bad, are passed down, you start thinking about how stories are told and how individual relationships. And I think what Moor Mother said about creating good relationships is something that we can all do. You know, whether journalist, whether label owner, whether educator, there are huge material things that need to be done to protect culture and to protect musicians. And whether that's ensuring that the big tech companies pay their taxes, whether it's ensuring government contributes, whether it's campaigning for universal basic income, whatever, those are like the big, and of course the campaigns for gender and racial and all other kinds of, you know, equality of opportunity. These are the big overarching things. But on the very basic day-to-day level, if we want to see a better music industry, if we want to see better culture, if we want culture to even be able to live from day to day, there are small things that we can do, and they are to do with building good relationships. And you know, I've seen actually with all of the people gathered here today, with what you're doing via Immersed, via Pinch's label, you know, I mean, the kind of sustainable relationships he's built with artists over the years, with exactly what Andreea was saying about the space for people to have meaningful interactions beyond facile networking in an organization like shesaid.so. We are able to exercise some kind of information quality control, if that makes any sense, you know. And it's so often that comes down to very, very old school values, most notably honesty and kindness, and the way that we tell stories, the way on social media, the way that we communicate our love for the music, the way that we recall great times that we had, the way that we amplify what we want to see. You know, if we say that in a way that shows the depth of relationship between individuals and talks with honesty, including the difficulties and the struggles and the fact that music isn't a hey, come on in, it's, you know, you can make a success of yourself, bing bang boom, all you need to do is dream, all of that kind of X factor stuff. If we're honest and kind in those communications, then hopefully we lay the foundations for slightly more sustainable growth in the material sense.
I love what you're saying, Joe, and I feel compelled to say something as well to add to that, because what I've experienced during the pandemic with my own community, shesaid.so, has been beautiful, even though it was born out of crisis. So we're one of those entities relying on, you know, brand partnerships and event sponsorships in order to carry our work out into the world, but most importantly in the industry. And that's become unsustainable for us. Hence, we moved over to Patreon, to a subscription model, because ultimately our members are most invested in us delivering as many opportunities and as much education as possible. And with that kind of community spirit, I feel like that sense of mutual collaboration, honesty, and openness to have those difficult but equally meaningful conversations has been highlighted more than ever before. And so we've been able to be a source of joy and connection and education in times when people weren't able to connect in real life. And funnily enough, we started that way, you know, and then we kind of ventured out into events, because ultimately you do need IRL, in real life connection, to really cement that digital relationship. But that's not to say removing that completely destroys the relationship. It changes it. And so it's been interesting to see how our community has evolved and how it's become more open and more patient and kinder to one another, because there are, you know, not everyone in our community is on the same page about absolutely everything, and that's okay. And it's been incredible to witness those conversations and to see how we're growing from it. And the last thing I'd say to that is that the crisis has exposed, as you were saying earlier, Joe, everything that was wrong with the music industry, and it's all happening at once. It's all blowing up in our face right now. And what I'm learning from this fact is that we're all in these little communities focusing on advocating for ourselves. In my case, gender, from an intersectional perspective. Other people are focused, the Black Lives Matter movement. Other people are focused on royalties. Others on saving independent venues. What we're learning ultimately is that we're all operating in a system that's broken. We all have that one same kind of goal, which is changing the system. And what I think is important for all of us to realize at this time, as we think about the future of the music industry, as we're reshaping it, let's make sure that we keep all of these different intersections in mind, and deliver a renewed system that works for everyone and takes everyone's individual challenges or collective challenges into account into an equitable way. And that means women working with men. It means white people working with people of color. It means the government working with big tech, working with creators, and so on. We need to create those spaces for that conversation where all perspectives come into play, and the solution is provided in a way that takes all of these perspectives into consideration.
Well said. I think with respect to solutions, one thing Moor Mother mentioned, and I know others have mentioned, is resources, whether they're grants or partnerships with brands or tech companies. I think wanted to make a point today that it's the tech companies that have the resources. It's not the government. They're not going in a direction that's helpful for artists. I think there's a few specific parts to tech companies that I'm going to try to do a bit of a screen share, see if this works. You guys see this?
No.
You don't? Okay. Well, there's three aspects, I think, to looking at tech companies and what they do.
There it is.
Their resources, the ownership, and decision making. And I think that's something that we're trying to focus on is, let's take a look at where the resources are going, implementing some profit share actions. Let's see who owns these things. I think that's something that's coming up more and more. We talk about Spotify, but who actually owns Spotify, right? Who are the owners? It's not the artists. So I think it's time to get some ownership. And then lastly, decision making, board representation. That's where decisions get made. And I think the more artists can unite and dig into these particular areas, into the places that actually do have resources to get these things done, will open up a lot of things. And I think, right now, as everyone's staying home, tech companies are really benefiting from this. So I think not the most obvious discussions are on the tips of people's tongues, but personally really excited to figure out some ways where artists can unite, the creators have the power, and really start to look into, well, then who has the resources and how can we work with them? I think, also want to encourage anyone out there listening to start to ask some questions. Feel free to ask. We've got some super esteemed panelists here with their own perspective. And I think, whether it's implementing education more, actually interesting to come back to you, King, for a second here on the education front, and anyone in America or the UK, actually. What have you guys seen as far as education in the public school system around music, and really starting at an early age? We're talking about building value. It has to start from the youth, right? Like in Europe, how does that compare? I've always, wondered that.
Well, I can speak on just my experience in the US, and something we were actually here at UCSD, we had a big meeting just the other day about I really want to go into elementary schools, specifically 7th and 8th grade, and schools in underrepresented areas, where they don't have the access to the same opportunities, especially here in San Diego. It's completely uneven. And so, you know, I want to bring a lot of the resources to those neighborhoods and, you know, really say, look, you can come here. You can, you know, they don't even realize that they can come to UCSD or any university for that matter and create music that they love and cherish. We had a day here called Black College Day, and you know, all these students came into my class, my electronic music production class, and they couldn't believe we were making beats and, you know, creating house and hip hop, and they were just like, we can do that here? I'm like, yeah, you know, but no one's telling them this. It's that.
I just did some work with a team called Future DJs in the UK, who are they've created a grading so that the CDJs can be taught like a musical instrument and graded like a musical instrument. And they've managed to persuade Pioneer to kind of give CDJs to schools. And there was some fascinating research that I dug up when I was looking into this that says that you know, the people talk about the Beethoven effect. I don't know if anyone's come across this. It's in child education, in the early years education. It's constantly brought up that or the Mozart effect, that if kids hear classical music, their brain fires and it makes them, And in fact, the best research shows that your brain fires more, you get more neural connections, you get more engaged if you hear music that is culturally close to you. So wherever you're growing up around, the music of your neighborhood, the music of your parents brings you into a more educationally conducive frame of mind. And so getting people to use CDJs, people who never would have thought of themselves as musicians, draws people into the musical education system. And I mean, I'm reasonably impressed with what I see in the UK. You know, comprehensive schools do allow electronic music production. They're increasingly taking DJing seriously and accepting that this is our culture and it's living culture that can get people involved with education.
Yeah, good point. I mean, how do we port the type of curriculum you've worked on, King, into every school system, you know, into the US, right? And abroad, right?
We're working on it. That's
right
one step at a time. But it really starts in
It
really starts in community. I mean, listen, I'm yes, Kamea is a sister, but I'm also just so inspired by what she does, and her and Rashida. And so, you know, you have the time camp. You know, you build community regardless of if it's in person or if it's online, but you bring a lot of people together, and that's very important. Collaboration is extremely important. And when you were talking about building relationships, and so, you know, having your camp or like just the way you present things, like yesterday for Unsound Festival, the 700 Bliss. I'm not sure who did the visuals. Who did the visuals?
They're called Pussy Crew.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, you know, Pussy Crew, 700 Bliss, but that presentation blew my mind. It was basically a video game, interactive video game with, you scored it, everything. And, you know, you're always someone who's extremely resourceful. And I feel that this opportunity in the music business, in all businesses, actually, we're all thinking about how resourceful we can be, especially within the pandemic situation. And so I don't know if you would ever thought about presenting in that way if it wasn't for this situation. Would you? I'm not sure.
What, like,
yeah, like
do more stuff online kind of thing?
Video game interaction presentation.
Oh, well, I mean, the festivals that I've been able to perform at, I've been able to have good relationships with the curators, you know? I don't know why. I guess because I'm just like, what's up, you know, or just speaking to them regular or something. But yeah, so they've been like really trustful, to, you know, just like really trusting to me and all of my projects and being supportive. So I've kind of been in this kind of nice situation where some of these curators and with music festivals have allowed me to stretch and think of things, you know, and it's a great way to build community. It's a great way to show people what's going on in like particular areas. And I think more of that was happening before COVID. Like, I think more festivals were like, let's give this kid a chance. Well, to me, that's how it felt like, you know, they were like, let's what do you think about this, you know? And I think having artists involved is always great, especially when people are not actual musicians and not out touring and then they're trying to put on a festival, you know, it's like,
right.
You got to walk in knowing you don't have all the answers if you're not on the road, I think. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I was doing, I had already been doing. So it wasn't too much, just a little bit of like working out the tech stuff and getting help on that kind of end. But that's always been the thing because I've never really been a part of the music industry for a long time. So I've been in my community. If I want to do a punk show, then I'm going to put on a punk show just because I want to. You know what I mean? And, you know, this kind of thing, not because of any type of thing. And I feel like I still don't actually have it all figured out with this COVID new reality of things, of, you know, doing things online. But this event that Black Quantum Futurism put on, Time Camp, went really well. And it was basically a weekend camp where we had different workshops. We invited different workshop facilitators, musicians, and, you know, we had 2 workshops going on at one time so people can float in and out, you know, really schedule what they want to see on, and not on an entertainment kind of way, a way to interact, a way for self-care, a way for meditation, all these kind of different aspects we had. And I think that what I learned that from that was kind of a new lesson was there's so many people out there that are doing really beautiful things that are doing it every day, and they have a community, and they have their, you know, their network. It just may not look like some viral Twitter page or something, you know, that has press or anything, but people are actually, you know, actively working, you know, and that's a positive sign because all we tend to know is what's on social media or on the news, you know, so it was good to know.
I like when you said trust. Trust is important on all levels, yeah?
Yeah, for real. I mean, there's so much tokenism and people trying to be politically, like, I don't know, in tune or whatever. So there's a lot of games being played, you know, and it's a lot of like new territory being charted. So people can be really reckless until they have their equitable systems in place. You know, I feel like we're still working with that, even with social media. You know, they're just like, it's still a jungle. You know what I mean? In this kind of sense.
Yeah. I think the current crisis, you know, like you said, a lot of stuff that was happening anyway is kind of amplified, and that trust thing, we're all being forced to realize more than ever the monetary constraints and how community and support and trust all involve money. They all involve material things. They all involve organizations or individuals putting their trust in the things that they like in the form of money. And that takes us away from the place where we've got to in recent years, where personal brand and clout and you know, internet celebrity and all of these things have overtaken those senses of what's real, and questions of trust and honesty and community are material questions. They're not about these kind of abstract things about reputation. So that's one thing that has been hammered home, I think, by the crisis that we're in.
Indeed, yeah. To an extreme. Gonna start kicking off some audience questions right now. They're rolling in. The first one from Rebecca from Moor Mother. Can you tell us a bit more about what Black quantum futurism is, and how could that relate to your vision of the future of the music industry, the music community? Getting a bunch of questions in from that.
So Black quantum futurism is a collective. It's a theory and practice with my partner, Rashida Phillips. We do visual art installation. Well, Rashida has her own press, Afrofutures Affairs. So through that, we create different books through Afrofuturism. We have 3 books out. We also produce short stories. Black quantum futurism as a theory and practice really combines African philosophy, quantum physics, but our strong point or our main focus is time. Speaking about how does it relate to visions of the future, meaning understanding how time works, understanding that time is not linear, meaning that we're not on this kind of worker man music schedule that you have to do, you know, like your career, you know, this kind of thing that your career is set out like this. Like, I've read so many articles where they're like, your musician lifespan is 5 years or something like this, or articles of telling you like about your own time, you know, span with music, you know, and also you see how time weighs on musicians, you know. There's so many musicians that I listen to a lot that have passed away, you know. So, of course, I'm curious about these musicians, so I read about their life, you know. It's not like they're being talked about. And I see, you know, the hardships they went through just in music, you know, and I feel like all the moments that they were, you know, subjected to these other kind of time vortexes, you know, meaning like performing in cotton clubs and this kind of thing of what kind of music you can play in a so-called jazz club owned by mobsters, or just all kinds of crazy, like wild stories you hear about. You know, so I just think about that and having to like break through that, you know, not hold this kind of vision of what a musician is, especially as a Black woman, you know. So it's really interesting to like think about time as you think about legends in music, and also about where you want to do. You know, I'm someone that I'm lucky. I don't follow any rules because I don't know the rules. You know what I mean? I'm slowly learning them now, and I'm like, I can choose to do it or not, you know? But I was lucky in that sense, but I want to push forward in that, whether it's about ageism, whether it's about how much music you're allowed to produce, what kind of music it is, like all these kind of little things that we push and stretch is like a miracle compared to so much strife, you know, and so much constraints that, you know, musicians like me had to deal with. So I hope that answered
Yeah. No, and let's and we'll push out and share links to the books that you all are discussing and have worked on. It's really worthy reads and important, I think, from an educational perspective. Anyone else want to riff off of that, or can I get to another audience question? Let's see. This one's fairly specific here from George. What do you think is the genuine reason behind Facebook not striking deals with licensing company? In particular, for such challenging times with a similar model to Mixcloud. Anyone want to take that one?
They don't care. Simple as that. They don't give. I don't want to curse, but they don't give. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who cares? We don't even want to be with Facebook anyway. I haven't even used that. You know what I mean? I didn't even know people still were using Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So we need our own platform. Like, fuck Facebook.
I suspect there's an element of them not wanting to be seen as a broadcaster. They want to be seen as just a conduit, you know, that people communicate through. As soon as they become a platform,
mm-hmm.
by licensing music and having responsibility for what's on there, then they're likely to get held more responsible for other stuff that's on there as well. And they, you know, abdication of responsibility is Facebook's modus operandi.
Yeah, and you have to pay money for
Anyway.
licensing.
We want to talk about trust.
So King, what about new platforms? You mentioned our own platform.
I mean, you know, we have all these platforms within platforms. So like we were talking, Andreea mentioned Mixcloud earlier, which is actually a beautiful platform. They also have, you know, you have live stream. You can stream live over Mixcloud now without worrying about being shut down because you're playing a new print, or, you know, an old Prince song. And you can also monetize it. You know, I think it's a start. And also, you know, we go back to Bandcamp. I mean, it's owned by, and Joe can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's owned by people that were musicians, I believe. And then the people that work for it, like Andrew Jervis, who has been in the music industry for a long time in different areas, you know, they know and they appreciate and love the music. They're not just in it for the business. So if we have more artists who become, you know, owners of these platforms, or at least behind these platforms, then I think we'll start to see a change. Even, let's just say, for festivals, you know, a beautiful festival, probably the best festival in the world, Le Gassou Festival, they always get artists to curate them. And, you know, Moor Mother was one, Shabazz Palaces, you know, they're always on the forefront of who's going to curate those festivals. And I see that more and more, that they're putting we'll go back to the word trust, into the artists. So if artists were to, you know, get monetary backing and start our own platforms, it would be cool. But having platforms within platforms are cool too, like Mixcloud or Bandcamp. You know, it's just taking the power back, you know, and the Facebooks and all of that, even Instagram. I mean, I love it, but it's just a tool. We have to remember they're tools. They're not the end all be all of where our existence.
Yeah, and they don't care. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I just wanted to add something on that. I think behind it is a really important point, which is that you know, Mixcloud is making this effort to pay the appropriate streaming licenses. Now, we have had the technology for 15, 20 odd years to be able to pay out on every playlist that's playlisted on radio, but we don't. The system is set up to play sample days. So if you played on the one of the 2 days that they sample on that station, you get a disproportionate amount of money, and it's just not fair. And really and truly, you know, to tie in this, perhaps this idea of a post-COVID era where there's a return to the clubs and there's DJs plugging in through record box into CDJs, and there's a system to playlist everything, and then a proportional payout would make a huge difference for underground music, which is currently so underrepresented, and there's so much more airplay and play of this, underground music. And then you have a distribution system which says whatever is the big playlist play on Radio 1 is going to take that proportion across this whole sector, and it's entirely improportional. And it wouldn't actually be that hard to fix that system, and that would already create a much more democratic income flow with relative to airplay.
I agree with you. It's the prorated system that's dysfunctional, and I like to give the example of Hollywood when it comes to the music industry, because they are also a complex creative industry that have done a much better job at implementing a system that works at least better than the music industry system, at least when it comes down to publishing, right? The publishing system is completely disastrous. There's money sitting in collectors' banks because artists aren't registered with all the collecting societies. So if you're in the UK, you're with PRS, but if you're not with ASCAP or BMI in the US, you're not going to get your royalties from the music that gets played in the US and so on. This is me oversimplifying it, but I think this is where creators have the opportunity to advocate for themselves by unionizing, I suppose, in a way that worked really well for Hollywood. And I'm not saying that music unions are the answer here, but I think the answer is in the collective power, is in the community. People, a majority of people coming together and applying pressure on big tech, applying pressure on governments to apply pressure on big tech in turn by changing the legislator and catching up with the technology and hiring, experts who understand how this works. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about intersectional effort, where creators must come, and then those advocating for diversity and inclusion must also be a part of that same conversation to make sure that, big tech doesn't build algorithms that have racism and sexism built into the code. It really gets as deep as that, because algorithms just continue replicating the same human behaviors. And if they were written by a white guy or an Asian guy sitting in front of their desk who's never been to a show, who's never spoken to a musician, they don't understand the challenges that this other side of the music community faces. And so again, coming together, unionizing, or coming together as some sort of collective is I believe a way to move forward. Maybe not the only way, probably.
Good segue into another question from Sarosh K. Are any of you aware of any more formal sort of artist guilds or unions specific even to the electronic music community? There it is right there. That's it.
I know of one that's trying to make an effort in the electronic music. They're called AFEM. The Association for Electronic Music, I believe. Although they're skewing very heavily on the house and techno side of things.
I just want to say real quick, Joe, were you talking about BBC radio?
On what front?
Oh, you were talking about the radio. I didn't know when you were talking about streaming.
That was Rob. That was Pinch, I think.
Oh.
Royalties and...
Oh, yeah, because I was just... My friend told me that if your music gets played on one of these BBC numbers, that the payout's really good. Yeah,
the payout on BBC Radio 1 specifically. So, I mean...
Like £37, right?
I mean, yeah, so your average track might get around 70, 80, 50 to 80. It depends how long the track is and how long it's played for. And then you would compare that to something like Six Music, and it would be I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but it's like it's £8. Right, there you go.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's your everyday life in the UK. Getting £8 a minute?
Yeah, for that station, yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm just finding out about this, so I'm just like, what?
Yeah, there's different licensing setups in the UK and from the US, and yeah, the nature of the income streams are a little bit different. In America, you don't have the same kind of blanket licensing. So TV and things like this, they have much bigger payouts, and in the UK, you have a blanket licensing setup which is considerably less in a nutshell.
Okay.
So there's slightly different models, how it's weighted and such, but the fact of the matter is that the money is not actually distributed equivalently per play for what is actually played to the people who are hearing it. So if you have a big number one and you're playlisted on Radio 1, you actually get a much larger percentage of the overall income that's collected within that agency distributed back for that track, and then a whole heap of artists who are completely ignored because they're on multiple small stations or streams or what have you. And I think if the model that Mixcloud are working with, if that could be extrapolated in a more democratic way across, I think that would make a huge impact on underground music. And the same thing with Spotify. I don't like the result, but I like the idea. The difference is just the money is not coming back to the people that are making the music. The actual model's great in a lot of ways. Why don't we have like a minimum stream payment, like a minimum wage or something? I mean, I don't know what that would be or how that could really equate, but I mean, I don't know. It definitely needs to be more equal and more equally distributed.
I can give the example of what France is doing, which is called a program called Intermittent. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it's essentially a universal basic income kind of system where artists who are in the long tail are part of the same, let's say collective bank as every other artist. And so if you're not making money from touring, or if you're not generating any income as a small independent artist, you are still getting paid that basic income by belonging to this association or whatever it is.
I think the model, unless it's changed, is that you sign up for this scheme, you get around €2,000 a month or something like this, but then 50% of your income as an artist goes back to the government.
Yes.
So
yeah, exactly.
That's yeah, I mean, that's a pretty fair way of doing it, but I don't know how realistic and easy it is to get signed up on these things either. That's the other thing, I guess. But it would be a good thing to implement in other countries. That idea that you're making this choice. I want to be an artist. I want my music and my creative, and I need time to implement that. And I make this choice, and you get the money back of the back of my fruits later on in life or whatever. Yeah, seems fair.
I think going back to the idea of information hygiene and how we encourage truthfulness within the way we talk about music. One of the responsibilities I feel as a journalist is to try and get musicians to say how they deal with all these things. I mean, it seems dry and boring, but actually it's not. It's like how a musician negotiates sync and radio and all of these things is part of their story, and it's part of what being a musician is. And the more these stories are told within interviews, just as normality, you could get it done in a couple of sentences. Just what's your bugbear? What's the thing that has been your hurdle as you come through in your career? The more this is talked about, the less arcane it becomes, and the less labyrinthine it seems to newcomers in the industry, and the less people get ripped off.
King, were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with what Joe was.
Good point, Joe. I think it's a good place to getting prodded here on time. Thank you, everyone. King, Britt, Moor Mother, Andreea, Rob Pinch, Joe Muggs. I mean, it's safe to say that to get to a healthy, thriving society, creators, musicians need to be at the forefront, need to be at the front, starting at the foundational level with education and trying to figure out some ways to implement these best practices that we've heard a lot about today, and sort of unified voices as we've sort of said, very, obviously seems to be not something that's happening now, but potentially something that's really, needed. So thank you guys so much for being a part of these discussions. You've inspired a lot of people in your daily work, and hopefully inspired some more discussions with this chat today. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Take care, guys. Cheers.
Everyone.
Peace. Nice to meet y'all.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Immerse. Hello, King Britt.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Inspired. That was
yeah. Now we get to kick into kind of the fun part of our show. We spend the hour and something getting into a lot of heady ideas, and with our Immerse series, we really like to take all of those thoughts and those ponderings and sort of move them into the body
nice.
with sound and performance. And you are helping us do just that.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, this piece, it's been wild with the pandemic because, we haven't been able to travel and perform, and, traveling really informs creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start to, look at your surroundings, because we're always on the move as musicians and touring and all. But then, you forget about where you are, like right where you are. And so this piece, I felt was important. It really sonically exemplifies where I am in this moment and my surroundings, and sonically like a contemplative mood that I've been in, just thinking about all the things we talked about today, but also just personally, like goals, ideas. And so this sonic journey just holds space for that. So whatever you feel is important to you, it'll allow space for that. So it's just a soundtrack to your own journey.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, because I think the sentiments of today's show is really just to settle into that space where we're at right now. And it's kind of from that place of center that we can move forward.
Yeah.
I know that there are a number of your fans out there, and you have what I kind of feel like is a sort of spaceship studio vibe going sometimes. Do you want to just, for those who are kind of really into what you do and how you do it, let us know with some of maybe the equipment you're working with, or a little bit of the compositional features of this
Sure, yeah. Thanks. So I'm in San Diego. I moved here last year, so my whole studio isn't here yet, right? So I still have a space in Philly. That's where the real spaceship is, right? But here is it's the satellite spaceship, but I have, it's not about how much you have, it's about how you use it, And so here, and I think what I've learned especially with the pandemic, is less is more. And so really kind of going back into, I need to learn every single aspect of this machine, instead of, I have 300 machines and I'm only going to learn a little bit of each, And so just here, I'm basically modular and semi-modular. I also have a Moog matriarch. Yeah, lots of pedals and effects. And for this piece, that's all I pretty much used. You'll see it, with the video. But as far as composition, it was all one take from beginning to end. And this is how I do my show on NTS, beginning to end, one take, no overdubs, just kind of taking a little journey, improvising through electronics.
Yeah, and that's super beautiful, because I think as we talk about sort of maintaining the integrity of sound or the integrity of experience in these times, something that's not, you know, so overproduced, that opportunity to still have that sort of live sort of, you know, I'm on with mute on, whatever goes down, has that keeping it real vibe, which I think is really important because, you know, as someone who's loving the scene and loving the music, being able to engage and kind of get that source of inspiration from artists to fuel my next step comes from that connect that, you know, maybe we took for granted in the past. I'm just trying to realize now through this forum. Sweet. Well, I'm not gonna keep you much longer because I know we've kind of had a long go of it and we want to get to
it was good. We need to do it though.
Yeah, but you know, is there something else coming up that you maybe want to let folks know about? Plug anything? Let us know, you know, what you're most excited about, where we can find you, anything at all you want to.
I mean, you can find me you can really find me on Instagram. I'm always on it. I'm on it too much, but just at King Britt. Lots of stuff coming out, lots of stuff. But I just released an album called A Rediscovery that my students remixed. So I had an album called A Discovery that came out this summer. It's a solo piano album. And then my students, a select few of my students remixed it. And I was so proud because they killed it, you know. And so that's on Bandcamp under the Buddy System Project, which is my label. So that's it. I mean, there's tons of other stuff, but for right now, that's enough. That's cool.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna kick to the performance. Before we do, I want to give shout outs. We're talking about sustainability, and there's a few key partners that help us run this show.
All right.
Pay the people involved. So big ups to Subpack, one of our primary partners, Dublab crew for collaborating, Sonarworks, who have helped us out a ton, Lander, The Loft at UCSD, who's been kicking in, Bushido Creative, and Music Motion. And I also want to give some shout outs to Daedalus because he's been working with us since the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
You were, you know, I go to him before every show and I'm like, all right, here's what we're up to. What do you think? And he was hands down King Britt.
Oh, that's my man.
Yeah.
And speaking about someone who's who went from
that's it,
you know, the electronic world into academia.
Exactly.
Big ups, man.
Yeah. I mean, he's been with us since the start 2 years ago. He was down here when we kicked off, and he's just So behind the scenes,
too. He's he's the ninja.
Yeah, lightning bolt force, ninja, all those good things, and professor. So, anywho, that's all for us. You have been tuned into Immerse. Check us out at projectimmerse.org. Thank you, Kim Britt. Thank you to all of you for your donations, your viewership, your comments, your support, this community. Peace. You've been listening to Immersed Digital, brought to you by Studio Feed. Shout out to our collaborating partners, dublab, Subpack, and to our growing community of partners, Sonarworks, Lander, The Loft at UCSD, Music in Motion, and Bushido Creative. And of course to all of you for tuning in and for your continued support. For past and future shows, check us out at projectimmerse.org.